All right, so everyone, I'm Christy Stevington. I work with Haggerty Consulting. We're helping the Oregon Department of Energy put on this event today. So just to kind of give you a quick background on what this is, I think many of you have participated in some of these feedback sessions in the past, but we're here to kind of discuss some of the changes and updates that have been made to the program narrative that was submitted to the U.S. Department of Energy. But there are still some areas of this program that we're looking to refine, notably the selection criteria that we'll be using to kind of score some of these programs. So we're going to go through a couple of areas for feedback and review, and we're hoping to get a really good discussion both virtually and in person. And so we're going to try to also help moderate and make sure that if there are questions in the chat or comments that we're kind of addressing both of these simultaneously. So we may have to interject in person to make sure that virtually people can participate as well. So just know to expect that. And I think we can move to the next slide, please. And just kind of run over some of the agendas and objectives today. So I think I covered some of this, but just to give you a quick overview of what this will look like, we'll do the welcome and introductions. We'll do a very brief, for anyone who hasn't been part of these sessions before, very brief kind of overview of the IIJA, Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, and this particular 401(d) funding. We'll also do the overview of the process, kind of what the submitted program narrative looked like, what changes were made based on feedback we've received, and then kind of looking forward, what we're still looking to get feedback on. Notably, the competitive review process, minimum application requirements, and then community benefit as well. We do have some other information that's available today that you might be interested in, but if we get to that, if there's time, we'll certainly do it, but we will have these slides available for everyone afterwards, just in case. And I think we can go to the next slide. All right, so for virtual participants, and I just want to make sure I hit all of the important points on this. We do have a comment section. We want to make this as inclusive as possible. I think I mentioned that already. So for anyone who's virtual, if you have comments, please feel free to put them in the chat. If you raise your hand, we'll have both someone from ODO and someone from Haggerty kind of monitoring to make sure those questions either get answered in real time or we'll bring you off mute to contribute to the conversation as well. So we'll definitely be watching for that. And I know Bryson is on, he will be helping us moderate and kind of helping you to direct sort of where to do what in terms of raising your hand and making sure that your voice gets heard. So thank you.
Can we do a sound check online? Can you hear Katie in the room okay?
Yeah, I hear it. I see nods. Okay, okay, fantastic. All right, and yes, if there's at any point, if we fade out or if there is challenges with tech, just throw something in the chat. We will be watching and try to get that resolved in real time. All right. Then I think if there is nothing else, we can move along to, I believe, to Ruchi to kick us off and kind of introduce the day for us.
Yeah. Thanks, Haggerty. Christy and Katie and Bryson are our consultants. Really happy that they're here to facilitate today because then we would have to, and we really appreciate their help. I just wanted to sort of set the stage and make sure that you are familiar with the Oregon Department of Energy. This is our mission on the side. Our department helps Oregonians make informed decisions and maintain a resilient and affordable energy system. We advance solutions to shape an equitable clean energy transition, protect the environment and public health, and responsibly balance energy needs and impacts for current and future generations. And then below that is a very short list of all the various divisions and programs and services that we offer at our department, kind of rolled up into this list. And today we're here to talk about an energy, a set of funding that will create a new program at the agency. So that last bullet there with energy program, that's what we're talking about. And that's going to support our ability to have a resilient and affordable energy system in this state. So you can see some really strong connectivity with our mission and our service here. I think we can go to the next slide. So this slide is just a list that we put together of some principles after the IIJA and the Infrastructure Reduction Act passed. We recognized that we would be receiving millions of dollars in funding to invest in clean energy, energy efficiency, resilience, among other important topics. And we held a series of public webinars. We had discussions with our energy advisory work group. We got feedback online to basically develop these principles as a lens for our overall approach to federal funding. So I won't read all of these, but you'll see a focus on equity, including geographic diversity, commitment to coordinate with tribal governments, where possible, providing technical assistance to folks that want to apply for federal funds, a recognition that we need to do some cross-agency partnerships. We work really closely with DEQ, with ODOT, with DLCD, and other agencies in the state, and we don't want to replicate their expertise. We just want to bring them on for the ride. And then finally, just to ensure that we're taking advantage of every high priority funding opportunity, but also ensuring that we have the resources and the ability to have quality work that comes from it, and we're making every available dollar go to its best use. And so, this is what we apply to every federal funding opportunity, and hopefully through the conversation today, you'll see that these very principles are in our discussion today as well. But yeah, thanks for being here, and I'll pass it back to the team.
All right. So we'd love to do right now, just to get a sense of who's in the room, is if we could go around and do a quick round robin of introductions with your name, your organization, what brings you to the session, and what you're most interested in getting out of it. And then for those virtually, if you could answer those questions in the chat, we'll go through and read them out loud at the end as well. So Rob, if you don't mind, why don't we start with you again?
Sure. Rob Delmar, I'm a senior policy analyst with Oregon Department of Energy. And I'm actually going to be the one who helps to stand up this program. So that's what brings me to the table. And the information I would most like to discuss is how we establish selection criteria to be able to identify the highest value projects in the program when we launch it.
I'm Loja Davis. I'm a consultant, and I'm doing research grant funding for the Warm Springs Tribe. And I'm just looking to get as much information as I can to help.
Great. Good morning, everyone. I'm Katie Toski with Haggerty Consulting. Haggerty is really honored to be supporting ODO with this initiative, and it's a privilege to meet all of you this morning. Thank you for being here.
And I introduced myself already. I'm Christy Skevington, but I am very excited to just be learning more about this funding, collecting all of the notes, the stakeholder feedback, really listening today, and trying to incorporate this into what the strategy is moving forward as well.
Andy Fletcher, General Manager of Columbia Basin Electric, a small cooperative in Eastern Oregon. And I'm interested in the overall program and what it's going to end up looking like moving forward, and what the criteria is going to be decision making.
Yeah, good morning, everyone. I'm Jay Lannister with Portland General Electric. I'm the Infrastructure Program Director. I'm in charge of all grant funding applications and project development for PGE. I do work with tribes here at Warm Springs on grant applications, and also for all of our customers, and just see what the criteria is for the state resiliency funds.
Michael Lofting, controller for Warm Springs Power and Water Enterprises. So we're looking at grant funding for various projects on the Pelton Round Butte Hydroelectric project, and with our 100% ownership in the Pelton Re-Regulating Dam Generating Facility. So, thank you.
Ruchi Sudhir, Oregon Department of Energy.
Kathy Eli, I'm the general manager here at Warm Springs Power and Water Enterprises, so we're really happy to have you here today. And so I'll second what Mike said, but we've also, through our tribal council, we've expanded our vision a bit for this enterprise. This enterprise is primarily responsible for the utility size efforts, but we also are helping the community because of limited resources. We have some of those here that we can deploy to get more of the community programs and such. So what I'm most interested in discussing is that criteria, and just how do you take advantage of all these opportunities? Are there priorities? Is there sort of a holistic effort to help us all keep track of all these so we don't miss any? So glad to be here.
Do we want to do a quick review of who's online?
Sure. We have Jessica Rikers from ODO, Emily Salmeri from ODO, Kyle Petrosine from Energy Trust of Oregon, Sarah Buckwalter from PacifiCorp, Joshua Bassifin from Climate Solutions, who's interested in understanding what the options are for grid resilience projects, Lee Elder from PacifiCorp, interested in community benefits. Jennifer Jolly, hello Jennifer, from the Oregon Municipal Electric Utilities Association, listening in on the conversation for member utilities who are eligible to apply. Emily Wagoner from Oregon Health Authority. She is at the session as power grid issues are of concern to the health and well-being of people in her region, Central and Eastern Oregon, and hearing more about the just general resiliency concepts. Thomas Elzinga at Central Electric Cooperative, interested in where the program is going and how CEC can take advantage of the funds with shovel-ready projects. Christine Golightly from Columbia River Intertribal Fish Commission. Michelle Detweiler, Renewable Hydrogen Alliance in Portland, interested in improving grid resilience and how hydrogen specifically can be a solution for that. Enan Jack from the Columbia Basin Electric Cooperative, interested in grant opportunities. Kip Note, David Evans and Association, looking to learn how they can support co-op clients, apply for funding opportunities. Dave Model from Energy Trust of Oregon, interested in community energy resilience, federal funding, and clean energy solutions. And Bayo Ware from Energy Trust of Oregon, interested in community energy resilience. And I know we have one additional participant.
The wrong mapping.
No worries.
Google Maps is the only one that gets you here, so I sat in front of a resident with trepidation, worried that I was really alarm someone. It's like I'm probably scared. So, Christine Medina, I'm the manager of stakeholder policy and engagement for Pacific Corp, and super thrilled to be here. So thanks for having me.
Yeah, thank you all. Oh, we have one more, Amy Schlesser with Odo, policy analyst interested in intersection between community energy resilience, grid modernization, and clean energy transitions. Thank you all.
Yeah. All right, then I think at this time we'll pass it over to Emily, who's joining us virtually today to provide a quick refresher on IIJA and 401D funding.
Good morning, everybody. Before I jump in, can everybody online and in the room hear me?
Does Patricia need to unmute her or can she unmute herself?
Okay, it sounds like folks
And Emily,
online.
I think we are having trouble hearing you on the in-person session. I don't know if anyone virtually is.
I know yesterday's meeting, we didn't have any control in unmuting ourselves.
Okay, okay.
Might need to unmute Emily.
We can hear. Oh, so maybe we need to unmute one of ours so that we can. I apologize in advance if this causes feedback.
So you'll probably have to put your volume all the way down.
We probably have to what?
Put your computer's volume all the way down, maybe.
Mine is now muted.
Okay. Can anyone?
How do we hear Emily?
Christine, can you hear me in the room?
Okay, thanks, Emily.
Yay! Love technology. Good morning, everybody. So happy to be here with you guys virtually. And we will jump into the meat of this conversation in just a little bit and talk about, equity and those community benefits and, of course, the scoring criteria that we really want your input on. But just to give a really quick refresher on where this funding came from, the program was funded under the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, also known as the IIJA. And the piece of legislation includes $62 billion for the U.S. Department of Energy to deliver a more equitable, clean energy future for the American people by investing in American manufacturing and workers, expanding access to energy efficiency and clean energy for families, communities, and businesses, delivering reliable, clean, and affordable power to more Americans, and building the technologies of tomorrow through clean energy demonstrations. All right, and the purpose of the fund specifically for the 401D formula grant is going to be outlined by the Department of Energy to improve the all hazards resilience of the electrical grid against disruptive events, generate the greatest community benefits and reducing the likelihood and consequences of those disruptive events, advance the Department of Energy's equity, environmental, and energy justice priorities, including the Justice 40 initiative, which we'll talk a little bit more about a little bit further down the road here, and invest in America's workforce. All right, and the application was due, they've pushed the timeline a couple of times. It was due to the Department of Energy on May 31st, 2023 for the first two allocations of funds under the federal program. We have already submitted our application. That was submitted on April 18th, and you can see our, the link to our application is on our website if you're interested in reading more about that. Under the program, states, tribes, and territories apply directly to the federal government. Once awarded, these grant recipients can then run processes to issue subawards to entities eligible as subrecipients, such as electric grid operators, electricity storage operators, electricity generators, transmission owners or operators, distribution providers, and fuel suppliers. Odo is the state agency that will apply for, receive, and administer these funds, and it is Odo's intent to focus on electrical utilities. Thank you. And although this legislation contemplates allocations over 5 years, the U.S. Department of Energy intends to issue the first and second allocations of funding at the same time, accounting for the extended application deadline that they gave us. So the first two allocations for the state are listed on the slide there, both a little less than $10 million. And as I mentioned, we'll get both of those allocations at once in this first funding round. And we're required to pass 95% of these funds through to our subgrantees. The program does have two match requirements. First, the state or tribes are required to provide a match of 15%. And then secondly, our subgrantees will be required to provide a match as well, which would be at a rate of either 100% or 1/3, depending on their electricity sales in the previous year. So that's just a little refresher. And now I will pass it back to the room for Rob Dilmar to take it from here.
Thank you, Emily. So Odo began work on this program last summer and developed a draft program narrative focused solely on wildfire mitigation, which was presented at a public hearing last August. And we've done a lot of listening since then, including a request for information that we shared with utilities in December, and then a public hearing in March. And the result was a final program narrative submitted in April that was significantly different from our original draft in August. Primary changes to the narrative include expanding eligible measures to address all natural hazards and not just wildfire, increasing the funding allocation to small consumer-owned utilities, removing the maximum award cap for small utilities, and proposing some flexibility in how communities define disadvantaged populations. And this is just a good time to note that the narrative that we submitted went into DOE, and they have an opportunity to comment and get back to us before the final program is approved by DOE. So we're awaiting word, which we hope to get later in the summer. Here's a budget summary showing the carve-outs in terms of percentage of sales and also in dollars. And so you see the approximately $20 million that comes to us for the first 2 years of funding. According to federal requirements, we would need to spend at least 25% of this with small utilities because that's the share of customers that they serve in Oregon. However, we propose upping this to 40% of the funds because of the unique challenges that the small utilities face, both in procuring federal funds and also with vastly distributed distribution systems. That results in about $7.5 million in this first round for small utilities. Again, we've removed the cap, and we're hoping for somewhere around 10 projects in this first round. And so if you do the math, that's somewhere around, $750,000 per award on average. We could do more with less, funding per utility, or we could do fewer with larger awards. We'll have to wait and see what comes into the program. And so that leaves about $13 million for the investor-owned utilities in their pot of money. So the narrative also included program objectives, including mitigating risks associated with natural hazards, delivering benefits to disadvantaged communities, maximizing community benefits associated with these projects, and finally, operating under a continual improvement model to ensure that the program continues to fund the best projects in future years. So that gives us flexibility to work on program design as we go. This is a list of eligible activities in the Grid Resilience Grant Program. It includes a lot of the sort of bread and butter reliability projects that utilities have to do just to keep the lights on. You know, utility poles, undergrounding, monitoring and control technologies. You'll see about 2/3 of the way down, there's an asterisk next to some distributed energy resources, including microgrids and batteries. That is included in the list. It's included in the federal eligible projects. But I put an asterisk next to it because these are not the types of projects that we really want to focus on. We have other funds for supporting microgrids and batteries. And so we really want to focus more on those, you know, vegetation management and natural hazard mitigation projects. And finally, at the bottom of the list are what's not included in this program. That includes new generation such as solar and also cybersecurity. And again, those have different funding streams associated with them, so not in this program.
So I know we have a couple of questions here just to kind of prompt discussion, you know, in terms of what you're most interested in on these eligible measures. I think what might be helpful is if we go back to that slide and just get any thoughts and reactions or answer any questions that you have. And similarly in the chat, if you want to comment on these or have any questions that you want to ask, feel free to put it in the chat. We'll watch for it. We'll try to bring it up in conversation as well.
Yeah, I do have a comment. Jay Lash on the phone here on electric. It's around microgrids and other uses. You say, you know, saying that those are in, I'm assuming what you're saying is that those are in the federal grants that we go after, which is true. Those grants are highly competitive. The resiliency grants, you know, the national competition is, you know, they're over 7 to 10 across the nation. So, you know, one of the strategies that we took, you know, when we looked at what's eligible for funding under these grants, the resiliency grants and things that we're talking about, undergrounding of electrical lines and some of these other things are very expensive. We put those into a large national grant award because we just can't do much with the state funds that we're going to get. You know, so there's limited dollars that you have, 10 million a year. We can do microgrids for emergency resilience centers and critical equipment and stuff like that with the funds. So that's the strategy we're taking. That, you know, what can we do with the state funds and make an impact versus what could we do with the federal funds and make an impact? So, you know, that's probably what we're going to submit for this. We have some of our large, like I said, the larger wildfire protection things we're doing on a national grant. So I would like that to be considered, you know, when you're reviewing these applications.
Yeah, that's, thanks for that comment. And yesterday we heard, you know, we had a lot of discussion about focusing in on critical facilities and that being one of the primary community benefits that can flow through this program. And so ensuring backup power to those facilities is certainly going to score the community benefits points that we talked about yesterday. So we were in the narrative, we adopted as much of the broad federal language as we could to keep all options open. And so I would say if this is what we hear from folks, that we would like to make this microgrids, especially for, you know, battery backup in critical facilities part of the program, but that's definitely on the table and it would be perfectly allowable use of funds.
We have one question from Thomas Elzinga. about when USDOE is going to respond to Odo about the expanded eligibility criteria for that?
I wonder if Emily could jump in on that question, because I'm not sure, and she may not be either. We're maybe just waiting.
Sure.
Yeah,
Emily?
if you can hear me.
Yes.
Okay, perfect. We're anticipating, and I say anticipating loosely, receiving some feedback, hopefully, by the end of the summer. The U.S. Department of Energy has a little bit of a different timeline and some other things going on, that things have been moving a little bit slowly with them, it feels like. So that's our hope, but we really don't have any promises from them in terms of exact timing.
Thank you, Emily. And Thomas, I see you've raised your hand. Would you like to come up off mute and weigh in on that further?
Can you hear me okay?
Yes, thank you.
Great, awesome. Thank you very much. I appreciate that. And thanks for this opportunity to discuss everything. Yeah, so just like some of the other previous comments that have been made in regards to the kind of the national this national opportunity announcement that came out. I know that we had tried to participate with some other larger utilities on some stuff, but we didn't quite meet, I guess, what some of their thresholds for some of our projects. And I guess I just want to understand. I mean, there's a lot of great things on here. We're trying to do a lot of these things that are on these eligible activities list. But I guess I just really want to understand, and I know some of the details are still in discussion, or at least up with USDOE for review as well. But trying to understand that threshold from like, yes, this is going to go, and no, this is not. And I kind of saw that kind of objective list, and it sounds like that stuff's still getting decided or still in discussion. But I just really want to understand a little bit more, or maybe there isn't anything more now, but just really what's that threshold that's going to push us over for some of these things? Because I feel like we're almost right there, but maybe we are over the Oregon, DOE threshold, but maybe not the federal. I don't know.
Okay, can you hear us now? Okay, great. We're back on. Okay.
Okay, I don't know how that was missed, but yeah, just that, Thomas, that's a good kind of precursor into the next this meeting, where we're going to talk about the criteria for this program for selecting projects. Right now, it's a blank slate, and we're hoping to get input from all of our stakeholders on how we should select these projects, and that Odo for this program will manage all of the federal requirements internally. And when we get to the point of the competitive review and the final negotiation of a contract with an awardee, we're going to try to make all those federal requirements as easy as possible for folks.
Thank you.
Does that answer the question?
Yeah, can we take Thomas off mute again?
Yes, thank you. Can you hear me again?
Yeah,
Just want to make sure. Okay. Yeah, no, Rob, that actually does answer quite a bit. Maybe just one little follow-up question, just as a point of clarification. So basically, if I understand correctly, I guess we will be submitting projects. You guys, Odo will manage, meeting all the federal requirements, and then it still is a competitive grant afterwards to see if the state or everyone under the state grant is going to be able to or going to be able to apply and get that. Is that correct? So there's still like a competitive nature to this still yet, even though we might be accepted into the state deal.
Yeah, we will handle the complete competitive review at Odo. And so the state will manage the selection of projects, and everything that we select in that review will automatically qualify for the federal requirements if we do our job.
Perfect. Thank you.
Thank you, Thomas. We had one question from Martina with Renewable Hydrogen Alliance. Can you elaborate on whether fuel cell systems count as new generation under eligible measures?
You know, I was thinking of that question when I heard that she was on the line.
Yeah.
And I was thinking to myself, would hydrogen qualify as a storage technology or a generation technology? And I don't have an answer to that. But we can dig into the regulations a little more closely and see if there's an opening there.
Yeah.
So I think we should dig into it, but my recollection from when this came up before was that it depends on how the project is designed. Like if the hydrogen is being used in the project as storage, you kind of have to document the purpose of it. But we can, I think we should double check and get back to you too.
Yeah. Thank you for that, Martina. Are there any other questions from anyone participating virtually or anybody in the room?
Andy Fletcher, Columbia Basin Electric. Small utility, these are, what you have listed there is everything we struggle with. From a cost perspective, we have limited funding, as everybody does. I'm not saying that people don't have that. But every little bit for these projects, the downside that we have is we have 1,300 miles of line with 2,700 members and 4,000 meters. So you do the math on that. We're a very low density or low density operation. So the community benefit of that side of it is somewhat limited when you start talking about hundreds of thousands of people versus 10 people. And that makes it even more difficult because the cost benefit from our perspective is it's pretty hard to put in, 10 miles of underground and hitting 15 houses along that way and make it to where it's a project that we would end up doing, but these funds would be perfect along those lines.
Yeah, that, we had a similar discussion yesterday about whether or not the number of people served was a good criteria in the program. And that if it's decided that that is a good criteria, then it should be also balanced with vulnerability within a system so that it's not driving all the projects to higher population density, service territories. So it's going to be one of the challenges to balance that in the criteria. So you can help us with that.
I don't know if I can.
I'll just base it on a percentage of cost to consumer at the end if they had to pay for the project in their rates. The allocation is based on that in the rate case or whenever you have to pass along costs. So if you got 4,000 customers in your entire system, anything that you do is going to impact the customers a lot more than a higher density populated area.
That's a really good point.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah, that could help the smaller, sparsely populated service territory maybe rise in criteria.
But the other consideration is that you can't make it so that you got one guy that's going to get the benefit of the service enhancement, and then, because that doesn't make any sense. So then that would be, thrown out at that consideration, in my opinion, because it's who you serving? Well, one.
Yeah. Yeah, good points.
As long as it's not a business customer. That's the other aspect too.
Some of the desire here, though, that we are like building a more robust system, that you would then remove some potential constraint to growth for those communities and future vitality. See, those communities, but then you would maybe potentially lean more so into the DAC criteria, some way to value proposition for that investment, even though customers count as well. I mean, just like thinking, yeah, right. See of the situation. I mean, that's just,
Yeah,
you know, I mean, we see so many communities that are, you know, they're low population, but they're absolutely constrained because they don't get the investments that they need in order to be able to do. And I especially see the impact of the young people in those communities that don't even have obviously consider based on Peter Potter values,
It comes into play where you have too much of a matrix
right?
to try to absorb, you know, so if you're looking at planned growth or anything, then you have to start looking at the urban growth district or the, you know, land use commission plans or whatever, and then you're starting to, okay, well, how long a process do you want?
Mhm.
You know, needs to be a simplified template, you know, based on the number of customers that are going to be serviced or upgraded because of the project, you know, the cost of the project, whether it meets the requirements that you're having the funding for, you know, and then whatever other aspects that come into play. But in my opinion, you got to do a simplified template.
Yeah, and it's not just customers, so some of these, some of these mitigations here are, population, right? And
Yeah.
it doesn't really matter how many customers are on that
Yeah.
miles and miles of land, the impacts of, putting that in the ground, are significantly higher, right, as well.
yeah, really good points, and I could see with the, you know, if we choose to have a number of people who benefit as a criteria, it's super simple. Number of people, and that's easy to judge between projects, and the balancing factor of that, of how you describe vulnerabilities in 2 or 3 selected criteria so that it doesn't get, like you say, you know, too crazy. You know, how frequently does that line go down? Is that population been served, even if it's only 100 people? Maybe they're cut off in a lot of other ways, so that describing that vulnerability within the system, I think, could help lift those projects up. And then certainly the liability and fire prevention side of things, that's a whole nother piece of it. I think that we heard a lot about PSPS yesterday, and that's gonna be built in to identify some of those projects. And, you know, we have to think about those a little differently.
Well, one of the criteria.
Getting a little bit of feedback that the 2 of you on the ends aren't very well, so maybe just reminder to kind of speak up. They can hear you though, and me, so. Oh, that'll help, thank you.
Oh, nice, all right.
Oh, I didn't realize that was connected.
Saddle's not at all.
It might be only connected through this guy.
Oh, you know what, that's for that.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's all right. I think just reminder to project.
Yeah, yeah.
well, one of the things is too, is that you can take into consideration the service area per utility, you know, and then the number of customers within that service area. And then that'd be able to give you a grid as to, you know, for the smaller utilities, you know, have it as a higher weighted average than the others based on the number of customers in the service area that you're covering, because yeah, your transmission distribution cost per customer is a lot higher, and to maintain those or upgrade those is a lot higher per customer than it is for higher density areas. So like PGE or PPNL, you know, they're in high density areas and do have rural areas, but they're spreading it across, you know, a much larger base of customers. So.
Yeah.
Yes, yeah, very much so.
And that's where identifying rate impacts as one of the vulnerabilities with certain systems really.
Yeah,
You can.
service
tell right
area,
away.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, those are great points.
Thank you. All right, I think we'll move on to the next section. This will all flow. All of this feedback is going to incorporate into the next section, into the next one, so we can continue this too.
All right, so we're going to move into a discussion about these community benefits. This slide is kind of a resource slide, and it's in a family of slides where there's about 20 more of this type of slide at the end of this presentation. We probably won't get to them today, but it goes through a lot of the federal guidelines and resources that we've been working on that we wanted to share and let folks know that it's common to a lot of different federal funding. A lot of these federal requirements can cross over. So these are the federal guidelines that are governing this particular project. And they direct tribes and states to administer grant funds in a manner that prioritize projects with greatest community benefits. And they base this on a few core policy areas, including labor and workforce, community engagement, advancing equitable outcomes, and implementing the federal Justice 40 goals. And again, ODO will take care of a lot of these federal requirements within this program.
Just want to highlight for everyone in the room, Jennifer Jolly had one additional thought that it's important to consider more medically vulnerable people in denser areas in terms of community benefit weight. Let's move forward.
Yeah. So we're going to move on to a discussion about community benefits and also some examples from some of our partners where we'll be able to talk about how these community benefits might be able to flow through these projects. And just want folks to keep these questions in mind as we're going through these examples. How do you define community benefits? Do you have examples of past projects that could positively impact labor and workforce? How do utilities already advance equity, diversity, inclusion, and access? What more can be done? In general, what areas do you think community benefit requirements could have the greatest impact throughout Oregon? And how can the community benefits requirements in the program achieve the greatest impact? And so I think this moves us into our project examples. Is that right?
It does, yeah.
And maybe Andy, if you want to kick us off, since you're in the room, and we can invite others to participate as well.
This is what we go through on a winter basis. Just about every single year, that's frost buildup on our lines, mainly in the Condon area, but it's throughout our entire service territory. Last year, we ended up losing 13 poles and 4 transmission poles during one of the storms. We ended up having to get a cat to plow in to get to the poles. We had approximately 23 people out of power for 9 days. At one point, every single one of our vehicles was stuck until we got the cat out there to pull them out. And then they ended up using the cat to tie off to lower down the ridge as we were putting poles in. But that's an example of what ends up happening. I gave this example a long time ago. I wasn't around, obviously, but right when we first started building the system, Billy Gentry was line superintendent. He tells the story of losing 800 poles because once the frost hit, it started snapping them, and they were just like dominoes going down. Then,
So you shortened up your span.
we
between
have
poles.
we have 300-foot spans now.
Ooh, that's still long.
On that.
Yeah.
And once again,
Cost.
right.
No,
Yeah.
poles are expensive.
And that's one of the areas that is pretty interesting. Wildfire takes, is where everybody's headed these days, liability reasons, right? More than anything else, but we have the PSPS to help mitigate those risks on that side during winter storms like we experience out there. That's where we have people out of power for the longest periods of time, obviously, because the storms that come through from lightning or anything else in the summertime are pretty short in duration. These can last a month.
So if I can ask a question, so in these areas where you get the most damage, would you be up for one, to put underground?
Underground.
Okay.
And it would, so there's a double benefit there, right? There's the wintertime benefit
And
of
then
not
the
ice
wildfire,
breaking and wildfire at the exact same time.
which are the hardest areas to get to.
Yes,
Right, good.
yes.
No, see, it's like past, so I mean, you have your past history,
Yeah,
I mean, that definitely would be something that you would include in the matrix also.
And I know there's a few more pictures
Yeah.
that we can go through if there's some.
Wow. Right on.
yeah. That just shows the buildup again on the trees. My favorite slide is, I think, probably the next, that just shows the building up even on our substations. But this is the one, you can see that's a power line right there, that's 12 inches. Frost, and it's on the ground.
After it fell, yeah. Nice.
And that happens just about every year. We have crews out ice scraping, knocking lines, to try to keep it down. But it builds overnight. I mean, they're out working 20-hour shifts to try to keep it, from taking out multiple poles.
Yeah, this particular issue brings up something that I hope we see in this program, which is projects that address more than one hazard at once. The fire hazard is, something that everyone's thinking about. But like you said, this is a winter condition with icing, but there's also a lot of limbs and things hanging around those lines in some of the pictures. So, if there was a wildfire hazard and a winter hazard that both get addressed, seems like that sort of multiple hazard mitigation could help lift projects in the competitive scoring.
Yeah, and at the end, getting back to the points that have been made on healthcare and everything else. Our aged population still lives on the farm, right? We're rural, farming communities really everywhere, and they're aging in place, which is really, really nice. Except when the power goes out, then they get cold in a hurry.
It's not just cold either, they probably have wells, right?
Yes,
It's different than in a lot of our service for water, they still have water.
right.
When you use that, just water, that's just.
That gets back to the entire point of the other thing we deal with on the fire mitigation side, if you want to. We're damned if we do, we're damned if we don't. We shut off power to these at-risk communities, high extreme fire risk communities. They lose their wells. When they lose their wells, they don't have water. Technically, if we shut off power, we're gonna get sued either way. Is the way we look at it, because we shut off their ability to protect their structures the way they see it, because they can't get water. If we don't shut it off and a fire starts, we're in trouble either way on those sides. And there's the only way to mitigate the risk is underground, on that side of it.
Yeah, that's very similar for us too, because our risk is in our more rural areas and the foothills, Cascade Range, the Coast Range. People are on wells.
Right.
Lower density, and it's the same issue.
It is, and it's one that I think every rural area deals with and struggles with on that side of it. To keep them, to have the availability of their wells staying on, yet at the exact same time, protecting everybody from fire.
Yeah, it should be rural fire
Yeah.
To also have access and volunteer firefighters to also have access, so in Southern Oregon, have been impacted many times. It's really hard to find a good middle ground.
Right.
We'll see.
You know, maybe there's something in there for these cascading effects, especially like you say, if you cut off the power, then they all lose the ability to fight a fire because they no longer
Yeah.
have water locally. And so maybe there's a way to build that into, again, that vulnerability piece. Trying to identify the greatest impact populations and letting those projects rise to the top. So,
Right.
yeah, well, thanks for kicking us off. I know that we had some others that were hoping to share some stories. I don't know if we have the ability to identify them and unmute them, or if there's any others in the room we can.
Sure. We have Greg Lamberg, who just weighed in. Peterson Power Systems is a leader in providing clean backup solutions to load serving entities for public safety power shutoffs. And Greg, is there anything else you'd like to say on that?
In this webinar here, I think this is a great discussion. I think the LJ presents some tremendous opportunities for all of us in the Pacific Northwest to harden our systems and provide more resiliency for customers. We are your local Caterpillar dealership throughout Oregon, and over the last 4 or 5 years, we've been providing a tremendous amount of backup solutions that run on renewable fuels to backstop public safety power shutoffs. We provide over 100 megawatts annually in the summer to Pacific Gas and Electric Company that we locate in their substations throughout California. We're starting to see more and more of this activity in Oregon and Southern Washington. And if we could be of any help to the Northwest load serving entities, please feel free to reach out to us, and we'd be happy to help. We hate hearing people going without power, without water in the summertime, and it's very easy to deploy and solutions to avoid those situations on the short-term basis.
Thank you, Greg.
Thanks.
I know that in the previous discussion yesterday, Christina, you had some really good feedback on some of the work for community benefit indicators. And I thought you made a really good point in terms of the work that's happening with the utilities in that space already and wanting to sort of learn from that, but also recognizing that the different utilities are in different places. And so this is a really good learning environment to sort of see what everyone's doing, where there might be some opportunities for alignment.
Right, so what we found, clearly we're really engaged and involved in working on community benefit indicators related to House Bill 2021. So we've worked from there, but we also had experience in Washington with CETA in 2019 doing a similar effort. And one of the key elements of that is building partnership and also creating pathways for engagement and input by people that are absolutely affected and impacted by a lot of these decisions being made. The key point I was trying to make yesterday in the space, and I apologize for those of you that weren't there, was that while there may be some, I think, maybe even mindset sometimes that may create a limiting perspective on how to move forward on community benefit indicators, really, I think there's some lessons to be learned by the very public process that a lot of, for example, the IOUs are going through as we kind of, as some people say, trailblaze down this path. We're doing a lot of data gathering. We're using census tract data. We're using information around weather and statistics. So a lot of our early like PSPS, pre-experience, right, data collecting that we're using to even identify these vulnerable areas has been quite useful. Overlaying those on GIS maps, taking a look at distribution system planning, and then also surveying our customer review community. All of those pieces of information are helping us to deepen our lens in a way that offers a really informed approach and how we weigh out the value proposition of making a decision, making an investment. And it just so happens now, a couple of years down the line, we have these additional opportunities which would help alleviate a cost burden that is obviously socialized across our service districts by potentially having partnerships with these brands. But I can tell you, today there are so many different challenges that have surfaced that our communities are facing that truly are barriers to entry to receiving any type of funding and actually being able to make use of it, right? So it's everything from not being able to fund or have the investment capacity to have a technical survey done, to even know what the scope would be to get the work done. You know, you're talking about undergrounding, and I'm thinking about the permitting process. I'm thinking about, okay, you're putting a thumper in that cost. You're thinking about the time to get out there and do all the scanning, you're thinking about ground shifting and all the other things that will have to happen right in the segments. So, you know, anything that we can do to maybe share some of that information, make it all live. It's all available online. And also just, again, recognizing the value of asking the communities what they need as well, because there's some real significant lens out there that people are really willing to share. I mean, Mike, you've been on this, a lot of calls with us now, and you always surface something that is just, I can't tell you how many times I've been in rooms where I've said, hey, that's great, people want to engage in this, but guess what, they don't qualify for a loan, or, you know, yeah, that money's sitting there, but there's a barrier because they don't own the land, or whatever it may be. And people are awestruck because they cannot believe, you know, I thought they were so solutions oriented and focused and doing the right thing, but there were these issues that were really, you know, creating additional constraints. Meanwhile, there's a time constraint.
And
Like, for
nothing gets
me,
done.
it's like, if I was ever to make a recommendation on these awards, it would be, let's get flexible with time constraints, because you have vulnerable populations that have, you know, they need support. They need the time to understand technically what's going to be needed, and then from there, build the capacity in order to accomplish the work. And accomplish it in a way with groups and teams that are not going to, I was going to say, exploit the need, right? Because sometimes when we're in a hurry, you want to get something built. We have all been overcharged before. That happens, and that's a negative outcome that really doesn't help a community. It actually hinders them. So.
One of the biggest things that I see, you know, with many government-backed opportunities, okay, is that they don't give a waiver. Okay. So like on you, just like you said, on your permitting process to go underground, why would you need that? As long as you're in the corridor that you had established, why isn't there a waiver to be able to do
Yeah,
that?
there are all those bits.
You know, and that's, you know, so transmission is a major concern in the area, okay? From where you have your resources to where your load is.
Yeah.
Okay, so, oh, okay, well, we're gonna let every Harry, Dick, and whoever come into play in putting their opinion in on, well, wait a minute. So your time frame from plan to construction has just now been put into the legal system and, you know, drawn out. So where does your benefit go to? You know you need it, but we're letting everybody come in and, you know, stop it. Well, isn't the public good factor come in as a waiver as to getting something implemented? I don't care if it's coming through your neighborhood or not. That's called eminent domain, and use it. You know, but there's
Appeals processes will really hinder you for
Yeah.
years. Yeah.
Thank you. We, Thomas asked a question, listening to the comment about permit timing, will there be a time period for when to spend the money from Odo on a project? I only ask because sometimes federal permits, like in forest lands for undergrounding, can take a year plus. And Emily, we'll pivot over to you for a response on this.
Thanks, guys. Yeah, absolutely. So, at the point in time when we have our negotiations with the Department of Energy finalized, whenever that might be, and we have our finalized award, our period of performance is going to be initially 5 years. And once we get to, you know, running our sub-granting process, we'll be looking at probably about a 4-year project period initially. And although we have mentioned that there are allocations that will, you know, further this funding. And so we could get extensions on that initial timeline, and it could be up to 10 years, but the initial period of performance we're looking at will probably be around 4 years.
So Andy Fletcher, Columbia Basin Electric again, another question along those lines. But then the next step on that is going to end up being, and I realize I'm jumping way ahead here, is the reporting criteria that ends up happening. And I'm sure you've heard numerous comments across the board that it's not just the application process. We have 16 total employees. And the burden of not only the application process is internal. The reporting is also internal, and that's just adding to the job responsibilities on that side. So the only request I've ended up making is the countless meetings, and it doesn't matter if it's from broadband grants, is the reporting requirements. We have to hold people accountable. There's no doubt about that. If you have the grant, you need to be held accountable for what you're doing. The depth and breadth of that, though, can be burdensome to the point of debilitating where you don't want the award.
No, you've heard that.
Where you don't want the award, because then you're spending all of your time reporting.
Yeah.
Or having to review and go through steps.
Yes.
Okay, I'll give you an example. Power Enterprise got an award, ERA award. Okay, this was 6-7 years ago or something, or maybe even longer. But the reporting requirements, you know, is based on the agent that you get at the agency also. You know, and they can make your life, you know, rather unpleasant as to requirements and detail and, you know, on stuff that is like a no-brainer as to the expenditure that you had. You know, so I do understand that, and that involved a lot of my time, which is also needed for a lot of other things. And up here, we have a staff of 3. Yeah. So, you know.
We are going to try to, one, build all of those reporting requirements very transparently into these performance agreements with our sub-awardees or the grantees. We have a couple of really excellent federal grant staff in our office right now. And we are going to really strive to streamline all the strings attached to this money and hopefully come up with ways to minimize the burden of that reporting. Maybe we can create some templates that are easy to fill out. And, you know, one of the things with these federal dollars is when you get the award, there's a certain expectation for what you're going to be doing with it. And it's checking the boxes. And if you go off the rails in any way, it can raise these flags and it just, everything comes grinding to a halt. So we're going to work to help with that reporting side of it with our agency. And we'll have our growing pains certainly as we go, but we're going to try to build it into our contracts and help with that as much as we can, because I hear you, it can be a real burden. Yeah.
See, one of the major ones for reservations is the Davis-Bacon Act. And the reason why I bring that up is because usually reservations do not like unions. Okay, so the labor force on reservations aren't union. And so then when you're trying to help I can't remember the Justice 40 area, you know, well, are you excluding them from the workforce? Because because that's aimed at unions. Okay, so now you say, well, you don't have to belong to the union to get paid. Well, that's correct. But now you still have the reporting requirements as to the weekly payroll and blah, 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 and then having to look at the wage for your area, and you're like, the compliance issues involved in that is overwhelming. And that was one of the areas, you know. So how do you make that simpler? You know, that's legislative and, you know, but definitely a area of concern for any award recipient.
Yeah.
Question. So, with all these grant opportunities, there are other avenues, there's the federal stuff that people have applied for. And some of those projects are big, they're potentially big if you're awarded it, like upgrading a transmission line, and that sort of thing, and you're hardening it, it's the grid resilience, it's got other benefits because it's, wildfire protection, because it's steel towers instead of wood, all that sort of thing. So there's community benefits there for that. Is the state considering any sort of partnership if something has already been submitted in a different venue because of the magnitude of dollars being spent that are required? Or is that excluded?
We haven't had a real discussion about how this might stack on other federally funded projects. And Emily may know different, but as far as I know, that's not prohibited. Obviously, you could use the federal funds from one to match the other. So there are some common sense things that we would have to follow. In general, with the programs that we've been working on at Odo, including kind of the sister program, the Community Renewable Energy Grant Program, we're trying to see how the program can leverage additional funds.
Okay.
This one, because it's federal money, I'm not sure exactly how that works, but we can look into it. And I can see how if you have a big project and there's a smaller piece you could carve out and fund with this one, as long as it met all those requirements, I think that we could probably do that. We might have to describe it wholly unto itself in this program and show where the funds are coming from, so we can, meet those match requirements.
Well, it certainly demonstrates the partnership, because you've got the Department of Energy that's seeking goals and objectives. The state certainly has theirs, and they're compatible. And so it makes sense, at least to consider it. So I'll just leave it at that.
Definitely, that's a really good point.
And just to connect some feedback that we received in yesterday's session as well, I think there was discussion around kind of creating criteria around, what the impact of this funding would allow it to do. So if there's a case to be made that by giving this portion of funding, it will also gain you access to these portions of funding in order to do these broader projects, that might be, that's something that could be weighted. So I think there was discussion around that yesterday as well. Great.
And Emily, did you want to expand on that at all from your perspective?
I was just gonna kind of piggyback off of what Rob was saying a little bit, in that I think it's a really great question, and it is a big priority that the Department of Energy specifically has talked a lot about with all of these federal funds, in that they're using the term braiding. So if you have the opportunity to apply for and receive several different sources of funding through the Department of Energy, there is definitely going to be an emphasis and an applause for, using these funds to the best of your ability and to braid them together in ways that make sense. The one thing that I would just caution is making sure that you're kind of following those requirements, whatever they might be, specifically built into each grant. For example, one thing might be you cannot use federal funds from one pot of money to cover your match requirement on this pot of money. So things like that are going to be things to consider. Yeah.
Thank you.
I don't want to break up this conversation, but I know the criteria will also have a lot of room for discussion as well. So in the interest of time, maybe we move forward. And again, if there's anyone virtually who has comments, please keep adding them. We will find ways to get to them as we move forward.
Okay, yes, we can move this along and jump to that next slide. We talked a little bit about how the process works and the review process. And so what we have here is a kind of a schematic of the methods of award that we plan to use. And this process flow is very similar to the community renewable energy grant program that we already have running in Odo. And our hope was that that would make it easier for participants and for us to have a familiar process. And so essentially we have an application period in which you all submit an application and we review it both for eligibility and through a competitive review process. That leads us to the performance agreement. And again, we hope to really streamline all of the federal requirements within that performance agreement so that reporting and things like that are very clear at that point. Then we move into the construction phase and we will have a reporting and invoicing loop that occurs during those up to 4 years of construction. And then finally, we will close out the project at the end of that period. So this is what we're proposing. And again, this is mirroring our community renewable energy grant program, which is a complementary program that can fund the solar and certainly microgrids, things like that can go through that program as well. This next slide is just a, throw something out there version of broad categories for selection criteria. And this is pretty close to what we've set up within that community renewables program, where we have a set of criteria that would describe project readiness and technical viability. We need technically sound projects in this program, worth about half the project weight, and then community benefits can bring an additional amount of points into these applications in this example. And then finally, some percentage to help the funds get spread around the state, some geographic diversity, maybe some technological diversity, although we heard yesterday that that's not as critical in this program. In the other grant program, we were trying to identify projects that weren't solar projects that tend to get all of the funding. In this one, everyone went out and did polls for fuses. That would be okay. No, so maybe that's not an important criteria. We have a few slides now that look at the criteria that we set up in our other grant program, if we want to look at those as an example, or we could just launch right into a blank page discussion about how we want to set up criteria in this program. But the end goal is for us to identify, features that can be described in an application that will help the best projects rise to the top in our competitive review. So that's what we're really aiming for now, is creating these selection criteria and weighting the points for how we score them in the process. So maybe we'll just put it to the room and online if we want to look at some of the criteria that we've got in our other program to plant a seed, or if you'd rather just jump into a discussion, either one is fine.
Sure. So some of the folks participating virtually would like to see what some of the ideas are. So maybe we can walk through those slides.
Okay, so we'll go through our criteria table from the CREP program. These are not what we're proposing for this program. Potentially there would be overlap, but again, this is trying to identify renewable energy and microgrid projects. So they are inherently different, but this is kind of the technical viability set of criteria that we have here in that program. Strength of the project team, strength of the project operation plan, how well is the project described in the application so that we get a good understanding of exactly what's proposed to be built. Financial plan. We're obviously bringing some share of the funds through these, the federal funding, but there's the match requirements. So we would like to see how the project stacks up and is something that can actually be constructed. In this program, we have statutory limitations to start within 12 and complete within 3 years. We may have a similar criteria that says, prove to us that you can complete this in 4 years to demonstrate that this is a viable project in the program. So moving on. Here are some community attributes in that program that sum up for a total of 10 points. And the competitive review process, we have a a competitive review team made up of Odo staff and some external partners that are able to weigh some of these things. So again, this is focused on renewable energy and energy resilience projects. So these might not perfectly translate, but location and community, community served, project leadership, maybe outside of the utility, how are community partners brought into the project to ensure that, maybe it's the county or the local town to, bring them into the discussion to see if there's any additional benefit that can come to a project where the utility's out there doing the work. We had a good example of one of those yesterday, with communications and power sharing in New Trench. And so they were able to share the cost. It meant the road was closed once instead of twice for each utility to do their thing, that sort of thing. Again, in this program, we had a community outreach plan to show how they were engaged. Equity framework, this might be a way where we could pull in those justice party requirements, demonstrate that we're serving disadvantaged communities. There is a map for that, which is in the resource slide. We may get to that. So maybe we'll jump to the next batch of criteria.
Yeah, we had one question
Sure.
on the external partners that Odo partners with on the competitive review of the projects.
That is yet to be determined for this program.
Okay.
I think with this program, given that it's going to be technically oriented utility projects, that we will seek some expertise for identifying sound technical projects with utilities. And if folks have ideas along those lines, we think that it would be hard to recruit utility members because of the conflict of interest. Obviously, you can't judge your own project.
I'm okay.
So that's a work in progress, but it's a good question, and we just want to make sure we have the expertise to identify sound projects. Like, we don't know that much about fusing and SCADA and some of these things that we'll need to evaluate. So yeah, certainly when it comes time to talk about the competitive review committee, we'll be looking for ideas there as well.
Yeah, I think that one other thing on the CREP, that was the, for the Community Renewable Energy Grant Program, that was the first time that we sort of did this approach with an external engagement committee helping us to score. And there's also a component on it for environmental justice where we got feedback from our advisory committee and those who are working in that space that, as a state government entity, we may not be best positioned to make determinations on what or what is not environmental justice. And so there's also an ability for the agency to provide some stipends to folks that have more expertise in that space and are under-resourced. And I think that's been a pretty helpful model. We've done one round of CREP awards already. The second round is the press release, I think, coming up in the next day or two. And I think it's been really effective. So good experience in that could be replicated. I agree.
Yeah.
We had one other question. Can projects be started before the application for grant funds?
I would like to kick that one to Emily.
Yeah.
If she has an
Yeah.
answer.
Emily, can you speak to that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think in this particular instance, it's probably not advisable just given the federal requirements with Davis-Bacon and particularly some of the other federal requirements that are going to be necessary. It's going to be difficult to comply with those if you've already started a project, but we can talk more about that if you had something in mind. Connect with Rob or myself. We'll make sure that our contact information is available to you guys.
And I think one of the parts of that parlay that a little bit is everyone is experiencing significant lead times in ordering. If something like this happens across the nation on the GRIP grants that are out there, underground cable that is sourced nationally, Southwire or whoever it might end up being, is going to end up being that those lead times that I'm going to mention how long they're going to end up being. Getting back to the extension of when you're gonna award it and how long you have to do it. You know, we're looking at transformers that are 2 years out, just to order transformers. So hopefully it gets better for everybody, but it's a consideration out there on the lead times for underground wire especially.
It's an interesting notion that the federal grants themselves could create this run on materials, because we've seen the hurricane in Florida that means transformers are all going to Florida and you can't get them here, but really with all this federal money flowing, that could be a problem.
Yes,
And the Buy American,
the Buy American is gonna be a
it's gonna
significant.
squeeze it more.
Yeah.
Reduce your pool.
And then the question is that, you know, the conduit that it's going in is American, but the cable may not be American. Some of those.
Thank you.
Yeah.
We had, so Thomas also had another question. Said, I like the idea that we mentioned early with looking at the utility itself to meet any underserved requirements. But if we hold it to only the Justice 40 rules, it could be tough to get more comprehensive projects done. And Thomas, would you like to, I guess, speak to this personally or weigh in with any additional thoughts on that? Great.
Thank you. Yeah, actually, I mean, this was actually part of the reason why we got rejected the first time around on the kind of just the general federal side was because some of our projects kind of fell into the Justice 40 area, but like it was maybe more like a 70-30. So, you know, 30% of the project was in Justice 40, and then the other 70% was falling outside of that. And we couldn't just piecemeal it as just like that 30%. It was like a, you know, a whole, you know, say a substation, you know, feeder upgrade or something like that. I don't know. I'm just throwing it out there. But this is kind of something that we were running into. So I'd love to, again, I know it's been talked about with the kind of expanding the underserved community requirements and what that looks like. So I fully encourage, or I guess I fully endorse that idea, and I encourage it to kind of see beyond just the Justice 40, because there's a lot more, what underserved means beyond just the Justice 40 in our service areas. There's a lot of rural disadvantaged communities that we're serving that just may not be identified on that map.
Yeah, thanks, Thomas. We have proposed flexibility in our application to US DOE, and we are awaiting their response to what we had proposed. But we would like the ability to go beyond the lines on the map and take community input as one of our ways to, you know, determine these disadvantaged communities. So I think that hearing your experience with federal dollars at eWeb actually gives me some concern that maybe they won't give us the flexibility we asked for, but we'll see. And that's one of those things we just have to wait for US DOE's response to our narrative to see how flexible we can be there.
Yeah. Thank you, Thomas. And I know that we have someone on the phone who had a hand raised. Wonder if we could bring them off mute.
Can you hear me, folks?
Yes, we can. Hi.
Perfect. Hey, this is Rohit Nair from Pacific Corp. Just had a great conversation. Appreciate this discussion. Just had a quick question regarding Buy America requirements. The Pacific Corp has made some, GRIP applications, but as part of the proposal or as part of the IIJ and the statute itself, as a for-profit, we can ask for an exemption and be exempted from Buy America, but that might not necessarily be the case for formula grants, is what I have been hearing. Any thoughts on that? If utilities are going to be held to follow that Buy America requirements?
Emily, would you like to respond to this from Odo's perspective? I can give some general guidance on the overarching, but I think this might be more about whether. And
Oh, I'm sorry for the delay there. I don't know that we have better guidance to give from our perspective than Christy that you might have. As
I'm
far
happy to
as
speak to it. Yeah, happy
Yeah,
to jump
please
in.
do.
So my understanding is that, yeah, it is required. There is a process for a waiver and you can submit one. So it does have to be approved by USDOE. It will have to go through ODO in order to get, but it is possible to apply for a waiver. So we do have, and Bryson, if you haven't yet, maybe we could share the website link to it. We do have steps and guidance included for what applying for a waiver would look like. We can provide that link. It's posted on ODO's website and just kind of what steps you would have to take, but it will have to be considered, a waiver would have to be considered first by ODO. ODO will submit it to USDOE, and that's kind of the process it would take. So we want to encourage it wherever we can. It's really only in extreme cases that we would consider it, but the goal is to try to adhere to it as much as possible.
Okay, perfect. Now, and just a quick comment on that. So I was in Washington, D.C. last week, and I spoke with the Grid Deployment Office and also the individual from the White House of OMB who is responsible for reviewing the exemption request for Buy America. So there is going to be some guidance that is going to come up and some instructions on what process or steps to follow to request for that exemption through the Grid Deployment Office for the formula grant. So my question was also, yeah, so really appreciate you providing some clarification on that. And we'll take a look at ODO's kind of process to request that exemption. The follow-up to that question was, is that going to be part of the sort of the ODO scoring metrics, right? So, for example, if you see a competitiveness on two good projects, but one project has more foreign sourced material versus the second one, which has more Buy America inclined material. So do you anticipate that to play a factor into determining which project gets the funding?
Would you also?
If you have immediate thoughts, go ahead.
We did
It
think.
sounds like nobody has thought of that, but now it's on the list of consideration.
So one of the things that we did talk about, and I think through the application process, so we can't give you a firm answer, yes, this is required, and no, this is not. This is a federal requirement, we only have so much control over that. But I think one of the things we tried to do and discuss is put together in our scoring criteria, there's an option for, do they have a thoughtful plan to demonstrate that they will have the capacity to implement this throughout their project. So it's not that you have to, in your application, be able to say, yes, we are going to do it. This is how we're going to do that and have that developed. You can still apply. We'll look at all of the different factors of the project. This will be one of them. And then, we will work with you. We will kind of, build this with you to say like, okay, have you thought through what the constraints are, what the conditions will take, what steps you'll take to try to mitigate them, and kind of build that out through the application and conversation process.
Okay,
Yeah.
perfect.
I think that answers it perfectly.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you for those questions.
Yeah. And I do think I will say, I think that goes back to the selection criteria piece as well as, these are federal regulations. There is only so much we can do and have so much control. How would you weight them, or what would you consider in developing this criteria? What should that look like? And how should we weight them?
Yeah. So if there's no other questions right now, maybe we move on to the last couple tables here. Again, these are specific to a program that we've got up and running that had certain, statutory requirements from the Oregon legislature. But on this one, I'd like to point out letter K. Project assists applicant in achieving goals in a natural hazard mitigation plan. This is where we might be able to address projects that are contributing to emergency response within a community. Something like this, I think, can bring out those community benefits associated with disaster response. So just wanted to highlight that one. Here's some more of the benefits associated with cost savings, economic development. Sounded like we were getting to a place where very low population service territories where costs for upgrades are socialized amongst a much smaller group of ratepayers. But there may be some value in trying to identify projects that, minimize rate impacts for utility customers. And then finally, we have the geographic and technological diversity down there, representing 5% of the points in a program. I think that we would like to have a means of spreading projects around, whether we do it by county or utility service territory, that we limit applications to one per utility. And then they, next round, they can come back again. I don't know, there's ways we could do that, but, yeah. I think with that, we can maybe move into just a discussion about what these criteria should look like. We've got about a half minute left. We have identified at least two main bodies of criteria. One is describing technical viability. One is describing community benefits. We can add other discussions to this as well. But with that, we have these prompting questions. First one, what criteria should we include and how can we score it? And then kind of a process question. How can we make this as easy as possible for constrained staff to come in and apply and these funds work? So
I have a quick question. Andy Fletcher, Columbia Basin Electric again. Is Oregon Department of Energy contemplating two separate application processes, one for large utilities that are going to fit underneath that large utility, since that's pretty limited on the number of utilities and they can be identified pretty easily, right? Three. And then there's everybody else. I wasn't sure if that was what you were contemplating on that side or not, because truly the evaluation process is going to be completely different. I think, not completely different, that's not fair, but the projects are going to be different in looking at them, I would assume.
it's a really good question, and it came up yesterday, and on one level, we would like the ability to move funds between the two pots of money. And in this case, we actually have 4 utilities because Umatilla qualifies as a large now. 4 million megawatt hours per year is the cutoff. And so, if we had common criteria, and let's just say the IOUs in some scenario went out and found their money from some other federal sources, only one came and they said we need $1 million and it leaves 8 million on the table in the rest of the program. We would want the COUs to be able to go in and compete for those funds in that round. But the way that the federal requirements set up this program, it's based on percent of customers served. And so the larger utilities essentially have a carve out because of their very large percentage of customers. So I would put that question to the table and see if you have thoughts on that.
I think, Jay National Point General, I think what you're gonna see is the large utilities, because we can't duplicate efforts across federal and state funding applications. We're gonna carve out types of projects for each. So it's not, I don't think you're gonna see us or Pacific Core or Idaho or even Umatilla not put in good projects under the state program. So I think there's gonna be a lot of opportunity to like shift funds,
Yeah,
across those two.
the split was right around 13 and 7 for the funds with the 40% carve out, which was considerably higher than the share of customers, and we made that argument in the narrative development. So I think that's something we're going to have to continue to work on, but we would like to maintain flexibility in the larger budget to move between pots. And the other way could happen too, where COUs say it's more trouble than it's worth, and then we have funds that we could put in the other direction. There's scenarios that we need to plan for in the program. So as long as we have that flexibility to manage the budget, I think we'll be open to further ideas.
I think that I think you'll be oversubscribed like quite a bit.
Yeah.
If I'm a betting person, I'm gonna put all my money on
Everything
that.
I've seen from all the other programs so far is they're all oversubscribed.
Yeah.
Right, there's just so much need out there, so much pent up, need for
Yeah.
doing this work that we haven't been able to get to.
Yeah,
And one of the benefits of this, and I think I've discussed this before, when you're talking about matching funds at 33%, that's not a barrier when you're talking about projects. Because you look at it and that means that we're getting, 67% of our costs covered on that side of it to do some phenomenal things. And that's huge on that side of it. Across the board for any of these projects. I do like your criteria that you had up there from the 50%, 45% and 5%. The real question is getting down into the details of each one of those. And I think that's where you're going with that. It's difficult.
Yeah, what came to mind to me on that was the project readiness, what that could mean a lot of different things to different entities. So, and it may vary depending on the project as well. Is it you're ready to do a study? Are you ready to start construction? Which is it? So there's a wide spectrum of readiness. And certainly for tribal entities, it's going to look a lot different than for a private utility.
And to your point right there is if we're shovel ready, but we can't get underground cable for 36 months, but if we had it, we could bury it. Is that considered ready, or is that not shovel ready? Because as we pointed out earlier in the conversation, we can't buy in advance, nor would you necessarily want to, because you're looking at a significant amount of funds, but how do you consider readiness?
should we have a criteria that specifically addresses material availability? That says, have you sourced your material?
It's a real hurdle, and so I would say yes, in some form. Because if they can do underground, but for the material.
How would we write that criteria so that it was something that could be scored in a review process? Do you have some verbiage in mind?
Maybe it's lead time, maybe it's different lengths of lead time. If it's expected by, 1 year, 2 year, I'm just winging it here, but something like that.
Yeah,
And perhaps, I've been pleasantly surprised in a couple of cases that the Department of Energy, U.S. Department of Energy has considered, they want solar development to happen, that they didn't have enough subcontractors or people to be able to do the installation, so they anticipated that. And then also have funding programs to train them up, people that are interested. So there is some forethought.
yeah.
Maybe, I don't know, is there something like that for manufacturers and things for some of this critical stuff, so while we think it's going to be a problem, maybe there's some activity going on to try and get ahead of that. I don't know. But the only thing otherwise that comes to my mind is lead time, expected lead time, because you're never certain.
Right, because they tell you what the lead time is,
Right.
but you never know. You never know.
And Jennifer Jolly, I see you on here. You've added a few comments, which have been really helpful. Would you like to come off mute and just share a little bit more perspective on those?
To the point on the using impacts of rates, I was just pointing out there that it's tricky because the IOUs have a different governance with shareholders and a profit motive that COUs don't. So I think having something about rate impacts could be tricky to make it work with the different governance models of the utility. So just pointing that out. And then with respect to a criteria related to materials and whether you have those ready to go, I think that many small utilities probably would not source materials unless they had a guaranteed award. So I don't think that makes sense, even though I appreciate the challenge of the materials and supplies right now. So those are my 2 points.
Thank you, Jennifer.
Thanks.
I'm thinking, I mean, bracketing that materials question, on one end, do you have all the materials in hand? On the other end would have to be, can you get them and install them within 4 years?
Right.
And so those are the two ends. And it could be a checkbox, can you get them and install them in 4 years, yes or no, and you get your points, and it's a little vague. Or we could break it out and say, you know, do you have the ability to start the project before these materials are delivered? So that when they, I don't know, something, you know, some more nuanced version of it.
So along those lines also on the criteria side, and this is a question back to you. What are you looking for on, so you're looking to award 10 awards. It could be any number, I realize that. But are you looking at certain thresholds? $1 million project is better than $100,000 project. A $500,000 project is better than a $700,000 project. My point being is you have to manage the awardees on that side of it to make sure you're doing it. So are you looking, would you rather manage 10? Because it makes a difference on the criteria, I think, when you're applying for it. Not as much on the large utilities, but on the small utilities, are you going to, is it better to have a $600,000 project or is it better to have a $200,000 project?
It's a good question, and I think that threshold works on both partners. Because the utilities say it's not worth all the red tape for $100,000.
Right.
And so that was part of what led us to remove the cap, which we used to have at 600,000. We have inherently a desire to maximize the number of awards. So 10 was a target just to throw out there as a space holder, but we would love to make as many awards as possible, recognizing that as you go down that dollar scale, it makes less sense for all of us to go through all the hoops. And
Right.
so, you know, with those 10 projects and $7.5 million at 750,000 average per project. And so that's not a terrible target number to look at. And we put that in our narrative that we were, I think the number we used in the narrative was $800,000 projects are where we see I won't call it a sweet spot, but that's a comfort zone.
Because utilities can scale, to your point. If you're looking at an $800,000 project, then utilities would turn around and say, yeah, that will end up working for me if I'm gonna get 67% of it. Right?
And our diversity criteria would lead us to favor 2 $400,000 projects over a single 8. But right now, that's only 5 points. And so that's part of this discussion is, you know,
Right.
Should we try to maximize smaller awards or go for big impact projects?
Because I think to your point on that, what I've heard utilities end up saying, getting back to your point earlier, I think, on the PGE side and everybody else is if it's, I can't get $1 million, it's hard to do the project that I want to end up doing, right? If I want to redo a substation to make it more resilient, that's going to be a $2 million project right off the top. But at the same time, small utilities, any incremental amount that you're adding to the ability to harden the system is huge. It's huge. So I just add more questions than I did.
No, it's a really good point. And if there's a way to design criteria, and the one I can think of is upping the geographic factor to maximize number of awards if we wanted to do that.
Well, it's not even maximizing the number of awards. I don't think that's what that's symbolizing. I think what a good point that you just put out again was the smaller utilities with less customer base aren't able to afford those upgrades unless they do undue economic harm to their customers because of the small customer base. So again, the weighting criteria of the service area size with customer base, so you do like, you have 1,200 square miles or, and you got 4,000 customers. Well, okay, so you do a ranking thing as to square miles to customer, and the least go on the top, right? Because they have the least ability to afford, right? And then you scale down to the large utilities where you have big customer base, they have greater square miles, but again, they have a lot greater customer base, so their percentage is going to be way lower, right? So then you have a weighting scale created right there that can be utilized. Right. It'd be like Central Oregon Electric, again, same thing. Or if Warm Springs had had a utility here, same thing, 640,000 square acres and 5,000 customers. Yeah.
Yeah, one thought is this idea of scalable projects and what's the sweet spot to go in and ask for. If we identify it as a scalable project, one thing in past programs at Odo, we have had a precedent to come back and say, could you take less and make the project work to try to maximize projects? And that can be at the front end where we just have a big pool, or more likely at the back end where we've identified our top 5 projects and there's 250,000 left. And we could bring in another project and say, you asked for 4, can you scale it down to 250 and make it work? And there's an opportunity at that tail end of awards to recognize scalable projects and bring more in.
Well, with a smaller one, so bring that up again with a smaller utility. So if you don't get grant funding to be able to harden your system, what do you then wait for? For it to break, right? And it becomes an emergency.
Yeah.
So who's more in need of that? While at larger utilities, it's part of their annual maintenance or their asset based, maintenance and upgrade plan. Because they're able to throw it into the rate base and, across the all their customer base, so.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. And if we ask the question, would you do this project without the funds? If the answer is yes, then you lose the grants.
Well,
If the answer is no, then we recognize this need, but it's.
The other criteria that I think that maybe you should at least consider in there is what has happened in the past. And I've seen this in a few of the grant applications, and it's probably already been brought up. But everybody has experienced outages. But what is the duration of those outages in the areas that you're talking about making it? And now realizing that in some of those instances, it might be a 5-year time period that these grants is looked at. I think you need to expand that a little bit and say, how many instances have you had over the last 10 years? Or what has your cost been in these areas? Because maybe we haven't had a significant number of outages, but we've expended $500,000 worth of funds going out and ice scraping for a 10-year time period. So incidences in that area is a criteria also in there.
So on incidences, one topic that came up yesterday that I thought would be helpful to revisit with this conversation is this idea that communities or your rate base, your ratepayers, some of them might come to your board meetings, some of them may be engaged by being an elected board member, but otherwise they don't necessarily care about. The joke yesterday was where the fuses are,
Right.
But what they do care about are the outcomes. So what are some of those things that your customers care about? Well, they probably care about an outage. They probably care about some kind of the duration of an outage, maybe. They might care about the cost, right? Are they energy burdened? How much are they already paying? Are they gonna have to pay more? Disconnections, things that they're actually feeling the outcome of. And so one of the things we talked about yesterday is how to help get an understanding of that in the application process to sort of have that be part of the criteria too.
Right.
And I'm not sure how much, different community members are involved in your sort of structure, but using your existing kind of network there might be a way to think about it.
Yeah, our board is made up of members,
Mhm.
which is beneficial on that side.
And we had a comment from Thomas that we can't always base it off outage time because we might want to prevent, say, wildfires in an area with 0 outages.
Right.
Which is also a consideration. We had one caller who I know has had his hand raised. Can we unmute them and give them an opportunity to weigh in on this?
Hey, this is Rohit here. So just a couple of comments maybe. So I heard about the scoring metric for the rate impact for larger territory with lesser customers. I think we got to be just a bit careful on that one because with with a lot more customers, the other scoring metric would also be the risk is higher for potentially outage impact or wildfire impact, for example, for a larger customer base as well. So there's a flip side to that as well. Yes, there's a rate aspect for the smaller utilities operating in larger areas, but there's a risk element that is pretty much a lot more pronounced for utilities with a larger customer base and also operating in a larger area as well. So just one comment on that one. The other one is on the I heard about the $800,000 being kind of the sweet spot. I think that's okay, but I think one thing, and this was one of the discussions we had with the Good Deployment Office last week in DC was I think what's happening is, and this is one of the reasons why it is so oversubscribed, this whole GRIP application processes and things, because there's a lot of first timers on this one. So there's an element of underestimating the level of governance and compliance needed to meet or to get these dollars. So there's a very significant effort that needs to be put in, be it Davis-Bacon, be it the audit requirements that's needed for every $750,000 plus that you spend on it, and you need to get an external auditor most of the times to do a lot of that pieces, the invoice requirements. So there's a lot of things that goes into it, and there's not a lot of information that has been shared till date on that one. So I think when we look at $800,000, when we add a lot of that governance, compliance, audit requirements, it starts eating into a lot of those benefits that could potentially come in from that, from that matching DOE money as well. So I think we need to also consider that particular element into the mix as well. Maybe that's not something for Odo, but maybe for a lot of the participants who will be competing for that. Is it really worth it to go after $300,000 worth of this program funding when we have to go through a lot of this rigor when it comes to the governance and compliance to get those dollars as well? So just a couple of thoughts on those two items I just heard on this call.
Thank you.
Actually pose a follow-up question to that, even to just put it in the chat. If there are others who feel that way, that like additional technical assistance, I know this is a discussion question we would get to if we had more time, but just to gauge everyone's kind of, if that type of technical assistance and support is useful or helpful. I know we did, share some FAQs. Obviously, that's not as helpful as hands-on training and kind of working side by side, but what is the gauge on that in this room? Is there a lot of interest in that type of support, or do people feel like they feel, relatively familiar with these requirements? Whether they like them or not, understandable. You don't have to like them, but do you feel familiar navigating them?
I would turn around and I would say that there's probably a large number of small utilities that don't understand the impact of what is going to end up being required, because to the point that was just made, now as soon as you're awarded X amount, you're going to have a single audit. on top of your normal audit. And everybody has to be aware of that because it's going to be a requirement to receive the grant funding on that side of it. But I don't think everybody understands completely, or the reporting requirements and the ongoing reporting requirements that are going to be out there.
I don't think that's, just small utilities, so, the large utilities haven't been eligible for these types of awards ever in the past, so. We are learning, we're trying to learn really fast what the requirements are. I mean, we got one grant from the federal side of the house in the last many years, right? And then stayed under that 750 threshold for a year for an audit, right? So we're just kind of managing that. We have never been through a single audit. Right?
It's not bad. As long as you keep your paperwork up. So, see, that's the thing. So it's like on the weekly payroll logs and that kind of stuff. As long as you get those reported, you got those as backup, and then you can furnish those as, proof of your expenditures and compliance. That's the whole thing, is compliance up front and throughout.
It'll probably get a little bit worse for a publicly traded company.
It's gonna be a lot, I think it's gonna be a lot worse for us, and just all that to say that, yeah, we would benefit from any kind of technical assistance, that's available. And I think everybody would.
Yeah. And Thomas, I see you've added, there's a need for technical assistance. Is there anything further you wanted to add on that note? Okay, no, he said none. Okay.
Sure.
And we have one more raised hand, if we can unmute the caller.
No, just wanted to confirm that, we would absolutely also support getting some of the technical assistance. Well, I mean, I can speak for Pacific Corp. Over the past 4 years, we have received more than $20 million in DOE grants for various different, projects. And, that's kind of, my comment was based on the experience that we have had going through, the whole process for a lot of those annual audits and quarterly reports and all those kind of things. So at least at Pacific Corp, we have sort of, at least in some areas, we have internally made some determination that it might not really be worth going after dollars if it's less than, X number of dollars, because it's just too onerous to go through that process.
Thank you.
In the interest of time, I know we only have a minute or two left, so Rob, I'll turn it to you if there are any kind of final feedback questions you wanted to ask or have next steps to share.
Yeah, I guess with a minute left, I went down a little sidetrack thinking about our previous discussion about how we might balance criteria that address the number of outages that occurred in, say, the last 5 years. Alternately, the expenses incurred in, say, the last 5 years to keep the power on in that place. And then a whole other category of wildfire mitigation projects. Project addresses wildfire concern. And I think those three stacked together, those are the types of things that we're starting to draw out of here. We'll put together a proposed matrix and maybe we throw 5 points on each of those and let you respond, or 10 points on each, because ultimately, I think we got a lot of good draft criteria out of this discussion, and we just have to pile them, and we'll throw something back out for comments and see if we can start drawing this balance of where we identify these strong projects. So I would say, since it's noon, thanks for everybody for participating. Thanks to Warm Springs for hosting us. This was a beautiful place to have our meeting. I'm sorry to those of you who are not here in person because it's stunning. And yeah.
The last slide, so they have the contact information. And I guess I'll just add to this too. You can see us flipping, for those virtually, you can see us flipping through all these slides. There is a lot of information here about the federal rules and regulations. There's a number of slides on minimum application requirements. So if you do have questions about those or thoughts on them, you're welcome to flip through these. Get in touch with us, but we just wanted to make sure you had contact information in case there's additional thoughts that you have following this discussion.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Now are you? Are you up yet?
Not yet.
No.
And neither are you, because the owl catch
Well-
us talking.
Well, the one thing I wanted to bring up was like in the, Energy Trust of Oregon.